Good morning, everyone. So today is episode 5 of Ask the Expert, and today we're talking all things school camp and sleepovers. For those of us who might have bedwetters, we're going to be talking about how to handle school camps and sleepovers, because this is obviously something that is so incredibly common. A lot of people don't realize how common it is to have bedwetters at school. And I was talking to a professional the other day, and she said for any kid that thinks they're the only one in their class, it's not true. And statistically, that's actually not true because it is so incredibly common. So I am just going to let in our expert for today. Join. Hopefully she'll pop up any minute. The joys of technology. Here she is. Hi, Ariella.
Morning.
So nice to have you on again.
Lovely to see you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks. Now, before we start, for people who haven't seen any of our lives before, can you just give us a really quick intro of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. So, hi everyone. I'm Ariella Lew. I'm the founder and director of Kids on Track Consultancy, and I am by training a paediatric nurse, specializing in child health and development. And we work with parents and schools and therapists, allied health teams to troubleshoot all areas of child health, well-being, and development. So that can be anything from sleep and toilet training and tantrums and all those hopefully regular milestones that sometimes what's normal, what's not, all the way to navigating the NDIS and behaviour plans for schools and everything in between.
Amazing. Really important work. So thanks so much for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about school camps and sleepovers. And I know myself, I even remember when I was younger having to go, I didn't go to sleepovers very often, mainly because I didn't like leaving my mum. But when I did, my mum would have to pack my plastic sheet with me. And I still remember having accidents at my friends' houses and her mum having to put like a books under the fitted sheet to air out the mattress because I'd had an accident, and it was just so embarrassing. So it's such an important topic that we talk about because so many people actually have to deal with this reality, and it's something that often we don't talk about. So I think it's really important that we share this information. So the first question I want to ask is, at what point should you start thinking about doing something in preparation for school camp? Like, how long should they be dry for, or if they only have an occasional accident, should it still be something that we prepare for at camp?
Okay, so it's a great question, and I think the first thing that I actually wanted to say is I think that school camps and sleepovers can actually be tackled very differently. Okay. I don't think the strategies are the same, and the main reason for that is I think school camp, we've got to worry a lot more about them missing out on a social experience or an opportunity, or because of the other activities that are going to be there. Whereas I think sleepovers, there are more workarounds, so to speak.
Yep.
And I think the thing is with school camp is something that certainly here in Australia, London less so, because it starts where I'm from, because we only generally start it later. So in school camp in the UK, generally the first one's about the age of 11.
Yeah.
Whereas here, a lot of the schools are going in sort of either end of grade 3 or end of grade 4, so it's already a little bit younger, and therefore you do have a lot of children who have this situation. So I know for everyone that's in the situation with an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old who's not dry in the night or sporadically dry in the night, it feels like your child's the only one, but you're definitely not. And I think even at that age, I think when you say when would you start preparing, in terms of preparing the school, let's just put that on the back burner for a minute, but in terms of talking to your child, I would start talking about that a good 3 or 4 months out.
Yep.
To actually say things like, how do you want to handle this? So one of the things that some schools schools do, not all, but some do, is that in advance of a school camp, they will send out the equivalent of a medical form, or is there anything about your child that we need to know, which is a written document that just gives them a brief. And what I would be saying to any parents who have had bedwetting, even sporadically, in the last, let's say, 3 to 6 months, I would put on that form history of bedwetting. So for a child who is predominantly dry, and I mean, you know, maybe one accident a month, maybe. For a child like that, I would talk to your child about, do they want to take a sheet, you know, a waterproof sheet just in case? Do they want to do something just in case? Or do they want to wait and see what happens? Right? But I think that having that documentation and communication with the school, and by the way, the same would be true if they're going on, you know, a footy camp or any other type of camp. There will always be some sort of documentation that you wouldn't have to fill out just for a regular school day or a regular, you know, Sunday, Saturday activity, whatever it might be. So I think, because what that will give you by filling out that form is you should then know who on that camp is in charge of well-being. And that might be who's doing the first aid, that might be who's in charge of all of these things, because your child, you know, there could be kids going that have never been away from home before because they get very homesick. There could be kids going who, you know, have to take medication before they go to bed at night. There's lots of reasons why. And I think knowing for your child, right, if something happens, Mrs. Jones is who you need to talk to, right? Or before bed, whatever it is. For them to have a name and a person that becomes their safe person, I think empowering a child with that, even if historically they are dry, I think that can be very empowering.
So how much information do we need to give the school? How much do we need to talk to them about it and tell them about it?
I think, again, it depends how much your child is wetting. So, as I say, if it's a case of actually for 3 months, you've had 2 accidents in 3 months, I would simply say history of bedwetting, and then put something like, you know, particularly if you're using your amazing sheets, which, you know, I'm obsessed with, it's something like, you know, waterproof sheet provided, or insert for sleeping bag provided, if that, whatever. So that's it. And the situation is done, right? So don't make more of a big deal of it than we need to make out of it. But if you have a child who is still wetting most nights, then I think it's actually about writing, still bedwetting, can I arrange a chat? And actually have a conversation with, first of all, talk to your child first about what do they want to do? What sheets do they want to use? Whatevers do they want to do? So do that first. And then I would actually be giving them a full plan. This is what we do at home. This is what makes them feel better. I know that at school camps in general, there's not that much contact with home, but it might be about arranging that if it happens, they can make a call to you in the morning just to give them that grounding and sense of security. So whatever the issue might be, giving them the options, I think, is important.
And I think as parents, we probably feel a bit like we don't want to talk to the teacher because we don't want to embarrass our child, or it's kind of that fine line between we don't want to say anything because we don't want anyone to know, because we know that would embarrass our child. Like, my son would be devastated if he knew that any of the teachers knew that he still wets the bed at night. But then at the same time, it's obviously incredibly important that they do know. So I think, would you agree that it's important that we tell our kids first that we're going to have to let the school know?
Absolutely. And there might be some kids that say, then I don't want to go to camp. And then first of all, I would be giving your child the opportunity. I think sometimes there's the embarrassment from the wetting itself, But sometimes some of the embarrassment and the feeling of being self-conscious also comes from the feeling that they are being talked about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you are going to set up a meeting with the school, a call with the school, whatever it is, I don't see any reason why your child, if they are 9, 10, 11, shouldn't be in that conversation.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
talking about a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old that's going into prep, and that's different. But we're talking about a kid that our biggest goal when our children are that age and bedwetting, certainly as you sort of get into kind of the year 6s and the year 7s, our biggest aim is to help them feel in control of it and to help them feel not embarrassed about it. And one of the ways to allow them to do that is allow them to take some ownership for it. Shared ownership, but still ownership.
Yeah. And as you said before too, because it's so important that they're not missing out on these opportunities because of this, that it's not something that needs to hold them back, and they might feel like they don't want to go because it's easier than having to deal with it, but then they're missing out on these opportunities. So it's really important that they, you know, we can work with them so that they're not missing out on these opportunities. So
I was going to say, and I know you talked to Catherine a little while ago, who's big on this as well, Dr. Catherine. But I think also it's another opportunity to actually build resilience in our children and do like joint problem solving with them.
Yeah.
I am validating it. I know this is embarrassing. I know you're. Now, there's another reason they don't want to go to camp. That's a different thing altogether. But if that's what it's about, there will be solutions.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. And in the chat I had with Catherine the other day about tools to help with kids that have everyday worries, one of them is social stories. And this would be the perfect opportunity to create a social story for your child about what would happen if you wet the bed at camp. And so you can create a story for your child with what they need to do, what might happen, all those things, so that you can be reading that together beforehand. So they're almost rehearsing that in their head, that if it happens, this is what I do. And so that will help them feel empowered to know what to do if that happens.
Yeah, and I think for the kids that are a little bit older as well as doing a set social story, you can almost look at doing a social story with them. Okay, you're very worried about it. Let's work it through. And in a visual way, with almost like written little Velcro tabs that you can put in. Right, these are all the options of what you could do. What would you like to do? What solution do you feel comfortable with? Yeah. And again, it's all about empowering our children, I think.
Yeah. And I even like the idea of it would be great to even practice it at home. Like, let's pretend you've just had an accident, get the sleeping bag out. What are you going to do? And actually role play that and practice. You know, like I know with my son, when he goes for a sleepover to my mum's, he brings a plastic bag in his little sleepover bag. And if he wets his nappy, or in the morning, he'll take it off, discreetly put it in his plastic bag, and then he puts the plastic bag in his bag to come back home, because for him it's hidden away and he doesn't have to go and take it into the bin and people have to know about it. So we've got some little tools that we use that he knows. So if you have some things like that you can practice that at home, so that if that happens, they're like, I know what to do. I've practiced this at home. And that could be a really good way too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Things that they already know. It's not about also I'm sure we're going to move on to some other sort of tips and tricks, but it's sometimes not about rewriting the strategies. Sometimes it's about, right, what strategies do we already use that work, and how do we adapt them? Yeah,
exactly. So what about kids who don't normally have a night nappy, who just wet the bed? Would you suggest that for camps they could wear one or bring one to help, or is that something you wouldn't recommend if they don't usually wear one?
I think that would be very child dependent. I would imagine for some children, the option of doing that, they would be like, oh, that's a really good idea. Again, because then they're in control. There's no change, especially for a child, if they don't normally wear one. In my experience, for a lot of children that don't normally wear one, they don't normally wear one because they do have the odd dry night. If they're soaking through every single night, many kids, till much older than everyone thinks, are still wearing night nappies, just because from a convenience point of view, and you would know this in your business, it's just easier.
Yeah,
it's
for
just
sure.
So I would say if they're out of a night nappy, the offer of going back in it is likely to have an extreme reaction one way or the other.
Yeah.
It's either going to be like, that's a great idea, because then I don't need to worry about changing the sheets, and I'm old enough to just quickly run to the bathroom in the morning and take it off, and that's it.
Yeah.
Or it's going to be like, but I don't wear those anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I think with the nappies, what you don't want is a child who's saying, but I don't wear those anymore. And in the meantime, a parent's kind of saying to them, yeah, but it's the easiest way to go through camp. Because what you may well then get is on the morning of camp, or just before sleep time on the first night of camp, I'm homesick, I want to go home. Right.
Yeah.
They may not actually be able to do that in the moment.
Yeah. And again, if that was an option that you are offering to them that they think might be a good idea, again, that could be a good idea to just practice 1 or 2 nights at home wearing one, so they know what it feels like, they know how to take it off. You know, that might be so it's not so foreign when they do get to camp, then all of a sudden they're thinking, I don't want to wear this, or, you know, so at least they might have a bit of a practice at home first.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I would say with, you know, and I know there's other strategies we're going to talk about, you know, the schools, all of the schools will have dealt with this before.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyone that says they haven't, they are lying. Like, right? Because I hear about it all the time. I'm sure you hear about it all the time. This is so common. But I think it is really, really important, as with anything, or many things when we're dealing with schools, to make the plan be the one that is your individual child's plan. So I would start by saying to the school, you might say to the school, what have you done in the past? If they come back to you and say, oh yes, we've had lots of cases of this, say to them again, how did you manage it? And then say to them, okay, like in your case, okay, let me discuss that with Leo, and I'll come back to you with what's going to work best for us.
Yeah. That's a great idea, because they might even have ideas that you hadn't thought of, because they have dealt with it so many times and so many different kids. So you might get some ideas as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what about
hear what they can do.
Yeah. So what about kids who do wet the bed frequently? I know I hear some people talking about medication and things like that. So does medication work, and would you recommend using medication for the school camp?
Okay, so medication is something that really is only done in conjunction with a pediatrician. And it's generally, I'm talking very generally used by kids that are already under the care of a urologist or a continence clinic or a pediatrician that's dealing directly with the bedwetting. Does it work? It does, but like any medication, some kids it works brilliantly, some kids it doesn't work so brilliantly. So generally the advice, and it's a short-term solution. This is not like you go on medication and you're going to be dry forever and ever, amen. It's not, that's not what this is. The medication is for can be used for specific things like school camps, where for a few nights you need to dry up the bladder effectively. And it basically, without going into all the physiology, it basically stops the bladder release. It's basically a muscle restraint, and it stops the bladder release. Most pediatricians, if you're going to be looking at that, will have wanted you to do like a 5-day trial at home before. They don't want the first time you're using it to be when you go to camp. There are also a couple of different medications that are recommended depending on the age of your child and obviously their medical history and anything else that's going on. So that's just something to take into account. So can it work? Absolutely. But it's something that needs a little bit more advanced planning than it's Monday, my kid's going to camp on Thursday, let's get a prescription. It's something that if you are under the care of a pediatrician, I would probably start talking to them about, 3 to 6 months before about, is this something we should be considering, and start the conversations.
And I think that planning in advance, because sometimes you might think, oh, by camp, I'm sure they will have stopped. And then you get to camp and you're like, oh gosh, they haven't. So that forward planning is really important. And we're lucky at our school, they don't go till grade 5. So they're 10 turning 11. But still, that's something that's coming up next year. So by just talking about it already and starting to plant that seed with Leo, I'm not going to assume that by then he'll be completely dry. I will assume he's going to be what he is now so that we can be prepared if that's the case.
And I would also say that I'm not going to say all because everyone's different, but I would say the majority of kids who are sort of 9 and up and are still bedwetting on a regular basis, the majority of those kids are under some sort of doctor who is overseeing what's going on, even if they're not doing huge amounts. So that could be a general pediatrician, that could be a continence physio, as we've talked about before. That might even be a really involved an amazing GP who really can oversee it. So I think having the conversation with those professionals, whoever they are, well in advance can be very helpful.
And I know that, and we've had a chat about this before as well, so people can go back and watch the episode we did on bedwetting alarms. But if your child is ready for a bedwetting alarm, again, do it well in advance before camp if you're planning on doing that, because it can take 6 weeks if it's going to work for that child. So if you can get that done well in advance, then that could be something that helps as well before you get to school camp.
Yes, and I also think if we're mentioning alarms are things that kids are not going to want to take on school camps.
For sure, definitely. So what about sleepovers then? So how do they differ, and how can you handle sleepovers differently to school camps?
Okay, so in terms of how sleepovers differ, the first way they differ, of course, is even though kids are embarrassed of other kids' parents, I don't think there is the same almost austerity, so to speak, that there is with a teacher, right? There is an informality there that isn't there with school. And also generally, purely because for us parents, the thought of any more would be horrific. Generally, when you're dealing with a sleepover, you're dealing with 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 kids. You're not dealing with an entire year level and teachers that you don't know, and maybe 1 or 2 parent helpers that you may or may not know. So I think it is a much smaller context. The other thing with the sleepover is I think you can get around it for longer with a sleepover. So, I've worked with many kids over the years where, they're not comfortable, much like you were, to sleep out. Sometimes that is because of bedwetting, but very often I find kids that don't want to do a sleepover with a super close friend, because most of the time we, as parents, we're not going to send our kids to a sleepover to a house that we don't know very well, or to parents that we don't know very well. So generally, if a kid doesn't want to do a sleepover, it's not actually just about the bedwetting. It might actually be a child, like you said at the beginning, like you were, that actually doesn't really want to leave their mum and dad, or doesn't, now sometimes it's necessary, but before we get to when it's necessary, for the times that they're doing it as social experiences and whatever, I would be looking at keeping those experiences. If your child is showing any resistance to actually, even though they've been invited to someone's house for a sleepover, they're kind of saying, I want to go, but I don't want to stay. Either looking at doing, and some parents are perfectly happy to do this, like a late play date. So they'll go, they'll have a pajama party, but 11 o'clock at night, they're coming home, and in the weekend or school holidays, that can work super well. Or actually saying, and people don't need to know the reason why. There are lots of parents now who, for lots of reasons, don't allow sleepovers. They don't let their kids go on sleepovers. So I think if your child is reticent in any way, to actually say to the parent, thank you so much, we'd really love to spend time with you, but we actually don't do sleepovers. Your child is welcome to come here, but at the moment we don't do sleepovers. So I think the difference between sleepover and the school camp is, I think there are lots of families for whom sleepovers are not a part of their vernacular for whatever reason. And I also think in Melbourne, particularly in the public schools, because they're zoned and whatever, unless parents are going overseas and they don't have family to help, or interstate or whatever it might be, there's not a pressing enough reason for a sleepover that it's worth sparking the anxiety in your child if they're reticent.
Yeah.
And that's why
Absolutely.
I think the two are different.
Yeah. So if you have a child that really wants to go on a sleepover, but they wet the bed, or they're going to camp and they still wet the bed, what are some tips and tricks that you can give us to help keep their privacy so that other kids don't know about it? Because obviously, as we've spoken before, the teachers are going to have to know about it, and we need to let our kids know why it's important that our teachers know about it. So how can we protect their privacy? How can we do it in a way where other kids aren't going to find out, or any other tips that you've got to keep their privacy?
So I think first of all, we need to accept that it is going to be difficult to keep their privacy. And I think we need to be not their dignity, but their privacy, and the two are different. Their privacy of like, no one knows that you wet the bed, I think that is going to be difficult, but I think there is a choice in, would you rather, you don't say it quite like this, obviously, but the choice is, would you rather someone knows in advance? So you know, in your case, you would be having a conversation with the parents about, I'm going to send his own sheets that are absorbent. So if it happens, that's that. I'm sending a bag, they go in it finished. Right? Rather than them have to make up the bed, I'll send the sheets and they can make up the bed with those when you get there. Or even I'll drop off the sheets to you in advance. So we'll send the sheets. So yes, the parent will still know, but the accident itself will be minimized. Or for the occasional bedwetters, not necessarily for the kids who are still wetting every night, do they prefer to see if it happens? And if it happens, but that for a lot of kids is more anxiety provoking. I think for many kids, they can accept that a parent, that their friend's parent may need to know if it's done in a way that actually doesn't involve them. Like, they know about it, but it doesn't involve them at all. So it's dropping off the sheets, or it's dropping off whatever it is. And, you know, the parent that, if we're sending our kids to sleepovers, it's somewhere that we know the parents. Generally, we like the parents. We trust them with our child overnight, or we wouldn't be sending them. So I think having that conversation with that parent about navigating, even if it is the privacy in the bathroom to go and put on their own nappy, and in the morning go and take off that nappy, as you say, like, you know, your son does at his grandmother's, whatever it might be. So I think it's about having a conversation like, that's amazing you want to go, and that's amazing you're confident enough to go. I'm just going to let whoever it is know that you're going to be bringing special sheets, or to make sure you get some time in the bathroom. They need to go into what details you're going to give. Our kids don't need to know that. They don't need to worry about that. But I think for me, it's much more important that we maintain their dignity, that if there is an accident, that won't be embarrassing, and it is going to be dealt with sensitively and calmly. And I think if you are going to talk to a parent of a child at a sleepover, I would also be having a conversation with them around, look, Leo, in your case, has agreed for me to tell you, but please don't tell Jack.
For sure. And I think that's permission for us to say that it's okay to say you don't have to talk about it with the kids. Like, it's okay to say that. And I even I don't know what you think, but I even think it's okay to have some little white lies almost for your child. For example, saying that, we said before with school camp, the teachers need to know, but in the case of our bed mates that we make, we've got ones that don't have wings, and so they just look like a blanket, like a little kind of blanket. So I could say to Leo, just, if your friends see your blanket, tell them that it's because you find beds on camp so uncomfortable that you like bringing this little blanket because it's just more comfortable 100%. To sleep on. And giving them those, again, practicing and saying to them, if someone asks what it is, this is what you can say. Because I know with Leo, when we say things like that, he does get worried. He says, but what if they think this? What if they say that? So we say together, all right, why don't you just say, this is for this? And he'll kind of be like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So you can easily say, oh, it's more comfortable. Like, I hate sleeping in sleeping bags, or I hate sleeping on school camp bunks. I'd much prefer to have my blanket from home because it's a bit padded, it's more comfortable. kids don't even need to know that it's for bedwetting. You can kind of
100%.
come up with these little stories of what you might say, so that if it does come up.
And I think that's where the social stories that you were talking about before really come in.
Yeah.
Really, in that sense of not a story in the way we do it with the little ones, but those social scripts.
Yeah.
Those, how am I going to explain A or B or C?
Yeah.
What can I say? What excuses do I have? And in terms of it being a white lab, don't we all do that all the time? We don't all tell our friends what doctor's appointment we've got and for what and when.
Exactly.
We don't do that.
Yeah.
So why should our children?
And if it's a matter of helping them, like an example actually is my son had gastro, and he went back to school, and the story killed me, but he went back to school and he was fine. It was a few days later, and he was in the classroom and he thought he was passing gas, but had an accident in the classroom. And when it's a number 2 accident in grade 4, it's very, very different, and it broke my heart. But when he came home, I picked him up and, put him in the shower and said, "You're all right," changed his clothes. We got home and he was devastated. He said, "What am I going to say tomorrow?" And so we really spent the day working out what he would say, how he would handle it. And we were so calm and said, "Oh, Leo, we'll say this, just say, no, I was sick," or I don't know. I can't even remember what we said, but it was we played it down. I didn't let him see that I was emotional about it because I was devastated for him. But by having that practice at home and talking with each other about what he's going to say tomorrow when he goes back to school, because he's going to have to go back and face everyone. And there were kids that saw, and you know what kids are like, it spreads like wildfire when something happens. So arming him with some responses for how he was going to handle it, what he was going to say, made all the difference in him going to school the next day, because he was nervous. But because we had rehearsed at home what he was going to say and how he was going to handle it, he was absolutely fine to go the next day, and it completely blew over and everything was fine because we spent that time at home practicing and talking about what if someone says this, what if this happens, what should we say, how should we say it. So that preparation really helped him, and it would be the same in this situation. If someone notices your sheet, if they notice your night nappy, what are you going to say? How are we going to deal with it? And I think, as you said, that giving them that control over what they're going to do means that it's not going to pop up and then scare them, because they've already prepared about it. They've already thought about, what might happen in this situation.
Yeah. And I also think, we touched on it before, but as well as that idea of empower, really working with, and this is the same whether it's school camp or a sleepover, but I think making for them what their get out can be if they need it, or what they can tap into if they need their parent. Because the reality is, however comfortable they feel with a wellbeing teacher or with whatever, it's not the same. It's not like in the situation you just described, you were able to get him back the next day. But has he been at camp? It may not have gone so smoothly. It's not the same. So I think one of the things I often recommend to parents is, and this can be done in a super duper private way at night, they go to a teacher just like they would if they had to take a tablet. And if they need to make a phone call home, they can make a phone call home. But I think knowing that reassurance is on tap should they need it, I think that can also make a world of difference.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And that would come down to that, preparing in advance, having a meeting with the wellbeing teacher or whoever is in charge, or it might be the classroom teacher if that's who they feel comfortable with. But having that person that's going to be you while you're away, that we can talk to our kids about, if this happens, you can go and speak to them, and having a meeting with them so that teacher can reassure your child and they can say, if it happens, come to me, you can speak to me. And again, with the little white lie thing, there could even be like a code word. It could even be, your child might say to their friends, "I have to go to get my Panadol from the teacher now." Or, you could come up, or "I have to go have my asthma puffer now." Or, you could come up with a little, that you can work with the teacher to come up with something so that, the kids wouldn't even think twice about it. But then it's that little out that your child needs to be able to go and speak to that teacher.
Yeah.
And I think as well, just practically, I mean, it's pretty obvious, but having, you know, a couple of plastic bags is a really good idea and they can be scrunched up nice and small, and obviously some spare pajamas or spare things they might need are really obviously great things to be able to pack if they are going to school camp. Is there anything else that you would suggest that they pack, or any other?
Well, the other thing I would say, like with the plastic bags, when we're talking about sort of white eyes, plastic bags is a really easy one, because it's like, oh yeah, my mum hates washing after camp, so she likes my clean clothes separate from my dirty clothes. Like, those kind of things are really easy to explain. I would be packing, whether they're in undies or nappies overnight or whatever they're in, I would be packing additional undies as well, just because you never know. And one of the things that for kids that are in nappies, some do like to do at sleepovers or school camp, is actually put undies over their nappies.
Yeah, right? That's a good idea.
Right? So even though they may have pajama bottoms as well, the idea that it's, I know it sounds funny, but some kids get very conscious about that kind of nappy walk.
Yes.
Right? If you put undies over it, it becomes much less, it can become much less noticeable. So even if they're in night nappies and they normally at home would sleep in them just plain, thinking about putting some undies in that they can put over can also be another thing to minimize that sort of thing. Obviously, if they are on medication, making sure that they know where that medication is, what time they've got to take it, and give them a bit of a schedule for that. And I also think when we were talking before about the social scripts, if needs be, I would have in a very private compartment of their bags, it could be in the bag with their toothbrush or whatever, on a little like index card, don't forget. Or just remember, you can always ask cool mum, whatever it is. And those things are there as like a thing for them to see. And also, if you've got a child, I mean, this is true with bedwetting, it's true for anything, but if you've got a child who is going to school camp who is very anxious and is very nervous for whatever reason, I would also think about sending things that in general for that child work to calm their anxiety. So if they do have, and again, the age and the teething or whatever you can work around, but if they do, and it doesn't need to come out of the bag, but if they do have, like, you know, a particular teddy or a bunny, okay, let's not pretend that 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds don't still have them, because they do. Put them at the bottom of the bag. So if they've had a bad night and they're having a bad morning, there's something there from home.
Absolutely. And again, you can come up with your little you know, white lies, but if a kid finds it and they're embarrassed about it, you can say, oh my gosh, mum put my sister's teddy in here, or why did mum put that there? Or, you know, they can come up with things to kind of, you know, because I know that my son sleeps with the sheepskin, but if his friends found it, I know, even though they have, and he's seen they have teddies on their beds, he would still be embarrassed. So he would just kind of say, oh, I don't know why that's there.
Right.
So it's easy to get around.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's pretty much it, Ariella. I think we've covered everything. So is there anything else that you wanted to add in, or?
I just think it's really important, which I know is so much part of the work you do, but like to normalize the fact that your child will not be the two things. One is the normalizing. Your child will not be the only child. And if they are the only child in their class, they're the only one in their class that year. The school have seen this before. This is way more widespread than people know or talk about. So from that point of view, really to that normalizing, but I also think that empowering is key. In summary, that making them feel like they are a part of the plan. I love that. And I think that's important too, because sometimes as parents you might assume they want to do something, but actually they don't. So getting them part of the discussion, part of the plan, is going to be far more successful than just you trying to do it. And I was just going to say with the bedwetting thing, by saying to your child, you know, they might not believe you that other kids do, but you could say to them, well, no one knows about you, so how would we know about them? And you can say, I absolutely guarantee that there are other kids doing the same thing as we're doing, so you're not alone, because no one knows we're having this conversation, so there will be other kids as well. And I think also in that conversation, particularly again for school camps, is actually saying, well, when I spoke to the school, and on some of the medical forms, actually, the school guide, it's a question they ask.
That's right.
Not all, but some of the forms, they ask it specifically.
Yeah,
like, does your child ever have accidents overnight? That not all do, but some of the more modern, some of the more recently designed ones actually do, which is amazing. And I actually think, well, you can't be the only one, because they don't make a form just for you. Or, you know, when I talked to your teacher or the wellbeing or whoever, they were saying these are the things they've tried in the past. So it's not just you.
Yeah, exactly. I love that, showing them on the form, actually showing them, saying, look, this is actually a question, because it happens, and that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Ariella. This has been so helpful.
As always.
All right. Well, you have a great day, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
You too.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.